Archbishop Miller, Mayor Robertson, ladies and gentlemen. Have you heard the one about the Archbishop, the Rabbi, the Orthodox priest, the Presbyterian minister, the environmentalist, and the politician walking into a room? Apparently you have, because they're here in the room, and you're here as well. And we couldn't have that array of guests with us started with that. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. My name is James Burkowski, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. We would like to start by asking Hrant Tahanian to lead us in prayer. Hrant is our Director of First Nations Ministry here at the Archdiocese of Vancouver, and he's also a member of the Squamish Nation and will be ordained a permanent deacon later this fall. Please welcome Hrant Tahanian.
I'd like to ask my elder friends from the First Nations to come and stand with me as I do this prayer tonight. It's our tradition that anything we do, any work, kind of like solidarity, we do this. I also acknowledge that we are on the ancestral, unceded lands of the indigenous people of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And so awesome, because we have a visitor here too.
The other side of the river.
Chesiam, God our Creator, I raise my hands in gratitude to you for the land and waters that you created for us to live on. Chesiam, God our Creator, I raise my hands in gratitude to you. Chenquen Mantomi, I thank you. Thank you by caring for your works and living in harmony with all beings as my ancestors did for many generations before we came into being. I thank you for the land animals which give my people nourishment and clothing, the plants and medicines consumed to keep us healthy, and the water creatures which fed my people as well. I raise my hands up for the teaching of sharing the land with others and using only what we need to survive in this world so as to leave something for generations as yet unborn. I pray that with your help and the help of my brothers and sisters, that those coming after me can drink fresh water from our streams and catch many fish, breathe fresh air, swim in a clean ocean, eat off the land by hunting and growing your own foods, and enjoy living in a healthy environment as in the days past, as my ancestors have lived for many generations. For all that you, our Creator God, have given us, Chenquen Mantomi, I thank you. And for all you people here, if you raise your hands, you will be in this prayer too. And if you could say Chenquen Mantomi, thank you, I thank you. Osiem. Thank you.
Thank you, Rennie, and thank you to our other First Nations representatives that are here. We're honored to have you. Now, a little information about how this event came together. It had its origins in last spring's release of a papal document called Laudato Si, which Archbishop Miller called a groundbreaking and essential document that calls us all to responsible stewardship over the creation God has given us, from our global environment to every man and woman we share this planet with. Shortly afterward, Mayor Gregor Robertson was invited to a conference at the Vatican on the role of cities in addressing climate change, sustainability, and poverty. After he returned to Vancouver, the mayor met with the Archbishop to discuss his meeting and the papal document, and it became apparent that there was a wonderful opportunity for the city and the church to work together and foster cooperation here in Vancouver between governments, faith communities, environmental interests, businesses, and individuals in caring for our common home and each other. For those of you less familiar with the convergence of the Christian faith and the world of science, we also want to take a moment to put tonight into context. While this event is unique to Vancouver, we are following in a long and proud tradition of collaboration with and support of the scientific community. And just one great example involved the work and relationship between Father George Lemaitre and a Jewish physicist named Albert Einstein. And for those of you that are not Catholic, not Jewish, and not into science, Father Lemaitre is on the right. So these two men are inspirations to us all. They built on each other's scientific findings, and they developed a deep mutual respect for each other. One of my favorite quotes all time, after one of Father Lemaitre's lectures, Einstein stood up and applauded and said, "This is the most beautiful and satisfactory explanation of creation to which I have ever listened." And this convergence between faith and science has occurred often, and we deeply appreciate the City of Vancouver and all organizations and individuals here tonight for allowing us to host this symposium and continue pursuing our mutual goal of caring for our common home. The issues covered in Laudato Si and those discussed here tonight are very important to our church and to our community. Thank you again for being here. Before we jump in, I wanted to briefly review tonight's agenda. So first we'll hear from Archbishop Miller, and then also from Mayor Robertson, who will each share their thoughts on this papal document and its local relevance. That should take about 30 minutes, after which we'll take a brief break while we convene our panel of First Nations, environmental, and religious leaders, who will be joined by the Archbishop and the Mayor. Then we'll provide you with an opportunity to ask questions and participate in dialogue with our panel. After the panel wraps up, we'll be sharing some calls to action in the hope that this can be a first step toward more cooperation and more participation in this worthy cause. So think tanks can play an important role in the analysis and development of policy, and we're hoping tonight turns into more of an action tank and a real invitation for us to dive deeper on these issues. Our first speaker has been the chief shepherd of Vancouver's 450,000 Catholics since 2009 and has been a prominent part of the city's religious landscape since Pope Benedict named him Coadjutor Archbishop in 2007. In the 40 years since his ordination, he has held a remarkable number of positions, from seminary theology instructor to university president to the Vatican Secretary for Catholic Education. Born in Ottawa, he attended the University of Toronto and joined the Basilian Fathers in 1966. He received his licentiate and doctorate in theology at Rome's Pontifical Gregorian University and was ordained a priest by Blessed Pope Paul VI in 1975. He holds 6 honorary doctorates from universities around the world. Archbishop Miller is a specialist on the papacy and modern papal teaching and has written 7 books on topics including Catholic education, the history of the papacy, and the encyclicals of Pope John Paul II. Since his arrival in Vancouver, he has implemented the Apostolate of Catholic Education for Teachers, established a First Nations Ministry Office, and an Office of Stewardship. He has started the first permanent diaconate program in the Archdiocese and has invited and welcomed the foundation of 6 new religious communities of women. Most recently, he established the Archdiocesan Missionary Seminary, Redemptoris Mater, as well as saw to the construction of this new John Paul II Pastoral Center and the St. Joseph's Residence for Retired Clergy. He is a frequent and popular speaker at conferences around the world. Please join me in welcoming Archbishop J. Michael Miller.
Thanks very much, James. Ladies and gentlemen, before providing a short introduction to Pope Francis's landmark encyclical Laudato Si on care of our common home, I certainly wish to express enormous pleasure that this symposium is being held here at the John Paul II Pastoral Center with Mayor Gregor Robertson, and then with panelists who will join us, Father Hrant Tahanian, Mr. Jay Ritchlin, and the Reverend Mary Fontaine. I believe that together we provide a vivid witness of the common desire and intention shared by you in this hall, those who want to think and work together in order to redress the harm we have inflicted on the earth by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. Together, I hope that we are determined, as Pope Francis writes, to recognize that we can always redress and redirect our steps, that we can always do something to solve the problems that confront us. And it's certainly my hope that tonight will be a step along the way in inspiring a common strategy to meet the challenges that arise from the environmental crisis and the sufferings of the excluded. A climate of change and a climate for change. My task this evening is to present Pope Francis's recent encyclical in such a way that its relevance to all people of goodwill can be recognized because of the questions it poses, the vision it presents, and the common directions it outlines for meeting the challenges that do confront us. I hope that by providing a brief and admittedly selective outline of the document, that you will indeed begin to see that he is bringing to bear the full weight of his moral authority in his appeal for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. And he says we need a conversation that includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all. As in all Vatican documents, the encyclical takes its title from its opening words, Laudato Si, which begins St. Francis of Assisi's Canticle of the Creatures. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth. Pope Francis leaves no doubt that he wants to apply the radical Christianity of his namesake to the problems of our contemporary world. Earth, he writes, is our common home, a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. This opening reference to Francis of Assisi sets the tone for the Pope's presentation of what he comes to call later an integral ecology, one that addresses the three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships which ground all human life: our relationship with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. In many ways, Laudato Si continues and develops the tradition initiated by his predecessors, by John Paul II and Benedict XVI, when they exhorted us, and they did, to respect what was referred to often as the inbuilt grammar of creation. But in significant ways, this encyclical also strikes out on a bold and fresh direction in Catholic social teaching on ecology. Now to a brief overview of the encyclicals. This is sort of the Vatican copy. The encyclical 6 chapters, which follow an introduction. I didn't count them, but they say there are 40,000 words, and I know that there are 184 pages. But this is easily accessible on the Vatican website and elsewhere. This is a fairly easy read for a Vatican document. It avoids sort of the academic and flamboyant tone of many earlier documents. So it's readable, eminently readable. And what I do, I'm actually going to go through by the chapters, highlight a few things that I think are interesting, and pose questions of what the Pope is getting at, and how this document can, in fact, I think, inspire us because of its tone. The first chapter, what is happening to our common home, draws heavily on contemporary, as we heard James mention, science, to summarize, and it does so very starkly, the degradations to which human activity the degradations to which they have led. The Pope laments, for example, atmospheric pollution, lack of clean water and its privatization, the loss of biodiversity. He pulls no punches when he writes that the earth, our home, you know this line, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. Direct quote. Francis also reminds his readers of the disproportionate impact of environmental damage on the poor, who are indeed the most vulnerable. This is a point to which he returns again and again throughout the encyclical. The poor suffer most from the degradation of the earth because they are the least protected from the increasingly violent swings of nature caused by global warming. And they also have the greatest exposure to air pollution, droughts, unsafe drinking water, the spread of disease. Today we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. And he says it must integrate questions of justice so as to hear, his words, both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Specifically of climate change, he says that it is a grave global problem and represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. Then he sort of sadly says, our lack of response to these tragedies involving our brothers and sisters points to the loss of that sense of responsibility for our fellow men and women upon which all civil society is founded. His second chapter is called The Gospel of Creation, and it takes not a scientific point of departure, but he draws heavily on Scripture to show how thoroughly creation is a gift from God. And he begins by frankly asking, and this is his question, why should this document, addressed to all people of goodwill, include a chapter dealing with the conviction of believers? And he answers, science and religion, with their distinctive approaches to understanding reality, can enter into an intense dialogue fruitful for both. This point is crucial, and I certainly hope that it will characterize the kind of cooperation that emerges and exists here in our city. The Pope then explains that the view that many Christians once had, and perhaps some still do have, of exercising dominion over the earth, that they meant that it was to subdue it or to dominate it. And he says that view is untenable. It must give way to an understanding, and again his words, these ancient biblical stories, full of symbolism, bear witness to a conviction which we today share, that everything is interconnected. Now we see perhaps more clearly than before that it is not a question of domination of man over nature, or the human person over the earth, but of the interconnectedness of persons and the earth. The human beings are part of the environment. They live, and he uses this nice phrase, in communion with it. They are not its abusive masters, its dominating masters. And therefore the environment itself imposes ethical limits which human activity must acknowledge and respect. That's the grammar of creation. In the third chapter, it talks about the human roots of the ecological crisis, or he calls it a crisis. And here he has interesting remarks about the relationship between science and technology. He doesn't argue against science and technology as a whole, but he does see they pose certain questions. And he says, and the problem comes when, he says, when humanity has taken up technology and its development according to an undifferentiated and one-dimensional paradigm. What does that mean? He says that science and technology have given those with the knowledge and especially the economic resources to use them an impressive dominance over the whole of humanity and the entire world. It's not so much just man and woman and Eden sort of in nature. Now, what is dominant? What is dominating? And he says a one-dimensional understanding of technology, to which he says we are enthralled when it promises unlimited growth. And he says this paradigm is based on the lie that there is an infinite supply of the earth's goods. And this leads to the planet being squeezed dry beyond every limit. Those supporting this paradigm, which is sort of the paradigm of a technology that dominates, he says, show no interest in more balanced levels of production, no interest in a better distribution of wealth, concern for the environment and the rights of future generations. Their behavior shows that for them, maximizing profits is enough. This is only one of the many blistering assessments he makes of an economy that is built on exploitation, greed, and ruthless competition. The encyclical is dotted with such references. Now, into chapter 4, his reflection on technology pulls him back into a more positive presentation of what he calls, what we should be looking for is an integral ecology. This is the central argument of the encyclical. A new paradigm of justice, an ecology which respects, of course, the unique place, and he certainly says there's a unique place for human beings in the world, but also our relationship to our surroundings. And he says, we must regain the conviction that we need one another, that we have shared responsibilities for others and the world. Nature, therefore, cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves, nor is it a mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. That's why the analysis of environmental problems can't be separated from problems of work, of family, urban context, how we relate to others. Again, it's the interconnectedness of creation. And there could be no human well-being that is detached from planetary well-being. If things are interconnected, they are radically interconnected. here again, thus the problems of the poor, whose plight has been the Pope's concern from Buenos Aires to Rome, are inseparable from the environmental concerns. And he ends this chapter with a question which in fact is the question that animates the whole encyclical. And it's probably our question. And it's what gives the document the kind of ethical tone that you would expect the head of the Catholic Church to provide, which makes his teaching different from that of scientists. But he says this: what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? This question not only concerns the environment and not isolation. The issue cannot be approached piecemeal. When we ask ourselves what kind of world we want to leave behind, we think in the first place of its general direction, its meaning, its values. Unless we struggle with these deeper issues, I do not believe that our concern for ecology will produce significant results. But if these issues are courageously faced, we are led inexorably to ask other pointed questions. What is the purpose of our life in this world? Why are we here? What is the goal of our work and all our efforts? What need does the earth have of us? It's no longer enough, then, he says, simply to state that we should be concerned for future generations. We need to see that what is at stake is our own dignity. In the 5th chapter, he begins now to say, he starts to list, well, what should we do? You know, he's seen scientific evidence, the light of Scripture and the tradition, the integral ecology proposed. And chapter 5 is called Lines of Approach and Action. And this is clearly, I think, the encyclical is clearly turned in light of the upcoming Paris conference. I can't see any, there's no other way. And he starts to talk, and he talks a great deal about dialogue, the kind of dialogue that is necessary, the kind of dialogue necessary among nations at the international level, within nations, the dialogue necessary between economics and politics, the kind of dialogue between religion and science. Also in this chapter, he lays probably one of the sharpest critiques. There are little bombs hidden in the encyclical. And in this one it says, to our Alberta friends, technology based on the use of highly polluting fossil fuels, especially coal, but also oil, and to a lesser degree gas, needs to be progressively replaced without delay. It's just one of the kinds of things that are sprinkled throughout. And in the final chapter, Ecological Education and Spirituality, Francis connects the global issues with day-to-day life. This is full of practical suggestions. And he calls on everyone, but particularly those from the wealthier countries, Canada, to question their habits of consumption and to begin to live more simply and less wastefully. But he approaches this not with, as one commentator said, with a save the planet seriousness, but with an attitude of thankfulness and joy for what we have. And I want to close now by affirming that despite its dire warnings, a great ray of hope actually illuminates the entire encyclical, which gives a clear message. Humanity, we sitting in this room, we still have the ability to work together in building our common home. We're still capable of intervening positively to resolve the crisis that is indubitably upon us. He's appealing to us, inviting us to work together to meet this challenge. As he writes near the end, all is not lost. Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start. The need for urgent action is clear, and this encyclical appeals to us to become painfully aware of what is happening to the world, to grow in solidarity, responsibility, and compassionate care, and to do this together. There is a climate for change. Now we just have to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Miller. Our next speaker is currently serving his third term as Mayor of Vancouver. During this time, Mayor Robertson has established Vancouver as one of the most livable cities in the world, with a commitment to growing a sustainable and thriving economy focused on high-growth sectors like digital media, clean technology, and renewable energy. Under his leadership, Vancouver continues to lead the country in initiatives to end street homelessness, strategies to address housing affordability, and innovations to solidify Vancouver as the greenest city in the world. He has also overseen the creation and implementation of the award-winning Greenest City 2020 Action Plan that aims to make Vancouver an environmental leader in everything from energy efficiency and waste reduction to clean air and local food. My personal favorite. As I mentioned in July, Mayor Robertson was invited to meetings at the Vatican on climate change, human trafficking, and sustainable development. He was the only Canadian delegate at a gathering of more than 60 mayors, the first time a group of international mayors has been brought to the Vatican. Mayor Robertson attended 2 sessions, the first being Modern Slavery and Climate Change, the Commitment of the Cities, and the second being Prosperity, People, and Planet, Achieving Sustainable Development in Our Cities. He was also the only Canadian mayor, do you see a trend here of leadership? The only Canadian mayor invited to the Our Cities, Our Climate Summit in Washington, D.C. to meet with American Secretary of State John Kerry and UN Special Envoy Michael Bloomberg. Speaking at the summit, Mayor Robertson called for strengthened ties between cities and increased action on climate change by national governments ahead of this year's climate conference in Paris. We look forward to hearing about the mayor's experiences and how they can have an impact on us in Vancouver. Please welcome Mayor Gregor Robertson.
Good evening. Thank you, James, and thank you, Archbishop Miller, for bringing us all together and the whole team here who's made this evening possible. Lots of people worked hard to make this evening possible, and ever thankful for that, and for all of you for being here tonight. I know it was a hot ticket in town, which is encouraging. Really appreciate you taking the time from your busy lives to be here this evening and to talk about next steps. That's a big part of why we're here. I want to start just by acknowledging Elder Nahani and our elders from Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam First Nations, our local First Nations, and Tawasin as well. Thank you for joining us and getting us started with a beautiful blessing. And my fellow council members, Councillor Tim Stevenson and Councillor Jeff Meggs, and I believe Councillor Andrea Reimer is here. There she is. And Deputy Mayor Reimer. So we work very hard on all of this, and it's been incredibly exciting and invigorating to have the Pope's leadership connecting the dots between climate change and the deplorable poverty, the extreme forms of poverty that create modern slavery and human trafficking, to hold up these egregious examples of all of us, humankind, gone sideways on what our potential really is. It's been inspiring to see how popular this message has been, how much the message has spread and energized people around the world, and I'd say Papa Francisco has really energized and catalyzed an incredible new conversation on how we overcome these great challenges and steer a much more hopeful and promising path into our future. So I had the incredible honor to be invited to the Vatican in the summertime. It was very much summertime in Rome. It was about 42 degrees in the streets of Rome. And that was the first wake-up call. It was a great honor, and it was a few days of my life that I will never forget for many different reasons, from the physical realities of being in Rome, being in the Vatican, and being able to see parts of the Vatican that most people will never have access to. Well, that was a real privilege, and in particular to see the gardens, the fountains, the beautiful buildings in behind the Basilica of St. Peter's was an extraordinary honor for me, and I took it as, you know, the part of the Pope's inspiration to walk to Casino Pio 4, where the meetings were held on the second day, which is a walk I will never forget through the smallest country in the world, on a glorious day. But what I'm told by others who work at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and Social Sciences is that they quite often run into His Holiness walking in the gardens or walking down the hall talking to people. There are quite a few random encounters with the Pope in Vatican City, because he's out and about and likes to walk. So I took it upon myself to embrace that in my time there, and that was a wonderful part of this. The time together as mayors, our time with Papa Francisco in the Vatican was very powerful. It's very difficult to get a group of mayors, 50, 60 mayors together ever, given we're charged responsibilities to our cities. We travel very strategically here and there, but it's hard to get a lot of us together in one place at one time, and particularly for 2 days. It's unheard of in the 7 years that I've been mayor to have that many together from big cities around the world, and leading cities on climate change, fighting climate change, and greening our cities. So it was an extraordinary opportunity to be with a group of leaders and to be sharing stories of what is happening on the ground in our cities. And the impacts are devastating today. The impacts of climate change that's already taking place in our world are very, very significant and underreported, I think, in the media. The stories aren't being told as far and wide as they should be, but we see the real problems flash, and the refugee crisis that we now face is directly tied to the climate crisis. We're seeing the challenges that I heard from other mayors, and to name one, the mayor of Lampedusa, which is an island south in the Mediterranean, just south of Italy, part of Italy, but it's a small community, about 5,000 people. And the mayor of Lampedusa she was invited to tell the story of what's happening with African refugees, primarily African and Middle Eastern refugees who are coming to Lampedusa. Many are dying on the way in the Mediterranean. There's unbelievable tragedies happening on the ocean there. Many are making it to Lampedusa, and the community is completely overwhelmed by desperate refugees who have had to leave with nothing. They've left their homelands where there is nothing left. They can't grow food. They've run out of water. The impacts of climate change in their home communities, or of war and tragedy, are driving them up to the north, to Europe. And those stories were gripping. And interestingly, mayors will tend to expound on the positive elements of their cities. And that there was a very hopeful and positive tone to a lot of our conversation. His Holiness focused in his comments on very direct impacts to individuals, to people in community, which was quite different from what I was expecting. The Laudato Si is full of so much rich content from the sciences, from the incredible contributors at the academy, at the academies, and it was interesting to hear him turn to the gripping stories of people being directly affected, and people who have been caught in a life of human trafficking, of modern slavery, that we would like to think doesn't happen anymore. But it is very real, and it's affecting millions and millions of people, our brothers and sisters around the world. So those days were full of these stories, and we left, I know as mayors, not only with a new commitment, a declaration of what we will do next, and solidarity around that declaration, but also stories about other cities, other communities, and how they're being affected. And I think it's inspired by the time together and the call to action that Papa Francisco gave us all. In his humble and joyful and rather unassuming way, he was incredibly inspiring in his words, and sent us on our way back to our cities and countries to do this work. Very mindful of the Paris Climate Summit that is happening in early December, is when go time is, when the national leaders will assemble in Paris. Part of our gathering in the Vatican, I think, really ensured that as many of us as humanly possible will go to Paris together. We're trying to gather 1,000 mayors from around the world in Paris, which is, again, unheard of, to urge our national leaders to make a bold commitment to fighting climate change, for the wealthy countries to support the countries in the developing world who need support, to overcome the challenges that they face, which they have not been responsible for. It's the overconsumption, the pollution from the wealthier countries, developed nations, that is causing this, and we have to contribute to ensure that countries that are developing now don't follow the same path, that they're able to leapfrog, to transform to renewable energy, and never go down the industrialized path with fossil fuels, further polluting our precious planet. So we have an opportunity as a planet to have a bold agreement and commitments by countries around the world that are very meaningful and that stem the tide. And I will say the evidence right now, we are, last year, 2014, was the hottest year in the recorded history of weather on this planet. The first 6 months of 2015 are the hottest 6 months in the history of this planet that's weather recorded, and the month of July 2015 was the hottest month. So we have a very challenging task ahead of us, because those greenhouse gas emissions are already in our atmosphere. The momentum of our fossil fuel economy is still charging ahead, really without abatement. And though there is efficiency coming in and the words are being said, the actions are not being taken and nearly as urgently as they need to be to stem the tide. So we have many more years of these impacts being felt, of impacts on communities and people, and tragedies before us that we will have to manage no matter what. But the essential action of ending fossil fuel consumption and burning fossil fuels into the atmosphere has to be now. It has to be as urgently as we can possibly make it. So our actions, the conversation is very important, but the actions have to be right now, and that's why at the City of Vancouver we have dedicated ourselves to being the greenest city in the world by 2020. And within that plan, we have very clear goals and targets to 2020 and checkpoints along the way. We have made some good progress already. We had a goal by 2020 to get over half of our transportation into sustainable ways, and that's walking, cycling, taking transit. Well, we achieved that goal this year. So we're already over 50% using sustainable transportation for our trips here in Vancouver, which is a great early achievement. Shows what we can do when we set our minds to it, and when we make change and take action. So we will go far beyond that goal, and those are individual choices that people are making, to take the bus, to get on a bike, to walk to work. Those are important choices that all of us can make as individuals, and as a city we need to enable that in every way we can. We need to make it safe, we need to make it convenient, we need to have the infrastructure to do that. So we have decisions and actions at City Council to support this plan, whether it's transportation, whether it's local food. You have good taste on that front, James. And we have to ensure that we achieve our goals as a city. We've actually stepped up in this year in planning to go 100% renewable energy. All of the energy consumed in the city needs to be renewable. We're on a very fast-track process right now to identify how quickly we can do that. We've said as a council, and the commitment that we've made as council is by 2050, we have to be off of fossil fuels, no longer burning them in the daily life of our city, which is a challenging goal. There's a number of other cities around the world that we are comparing notes with right now, building these work plans, how we get to 100% renewable. In Europe, they like to say fossil fuel free. That's the leading edge of cities right now in fighting climate change, making our cities more livable, and really importantly, creating a whole new economy that's based on taking care of our planet, being more efficient, embracing new technology that enables that. And that is our future economy, that will be in balance with nature, and that's what we have to strive for. Fortunately, that creates enormous business opportunities. We've seen, as one of our goals, to double the number of green jobs in Vancouver. We've seen over 3,000 new green jobs created over the past 3 years in Vancouver. So we're tracking well as part of building this new green economy. We are creating jobs, creating opportunity for people to be in the city and do work that minimizes or eliminates their impact on our planet, and therefore on our city, on ourselves. So we are making progress on that. We're working with other cities and doing that, and those actions are going to be really critical. They're really critical for us to be able to say to national leaders, you have to make commitments. We're going to deliver in the cities. We're on the front lines, day after day. We're going to make a difference, and we're going to inspire our citizens to use sustainable transportation, to eat local food, to have less waste, to consume less water. And look at the drought that we just went through this summer. It's patently obvious that we need to use a lot less water. So those are actions we can take in the city, and we can hold that up in these weeks and months ahead as examples of success that we can have when we set our minds to it and take action. I'm hopeful that we have an unprecedented agreement from Paris and the Climate Summit in December. The indicators are that we're on track for that, which is fantastic. We had President Francois Hollande was in New York during Climate Week, and the report back from his team is that it's looking good for the agreement. The big gap and the challenge is going to be on the dollars that developed countries are going to need to contribute to developing countries to make sure that they have the investment to leapfrog beyond the heavy carbon-based economies that we have built in developed countries. So the funding is going to be really important, and that's a call that's starting to get louder and louder. We have all of these contributions, these commitments made by countries. They have to come along with resources to enable everyone to improve and to transform their economies. And that'll be a big piece. That's apparently the gap right now in the time to come. So I would just say in closing, this is the declaration that His Holiness and the mayors gathered in the Vatican signed, and there are a few lines in here that I wanted to share, which first and foremost are around. Laudato Si has all the content, and it's extracted here in very concise form, but then we set to our commitments. And as I'll read from this, as mayors, we commit ourselves to building in our cities and urban settlements the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situations, and reducing their exposure to climate-related extreme events and other economic, social, and environmental shocks and disasters which foster human trafficking and dangerous forced migration. This is the connecting the dots. You can't separate environment, social, and economic impacts here. We want our cities and urban settlements to become ever more socially inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. All sectors and stakeholders must do their part, a pledge that we fully commit ourselves to in our capacities as mayors and individuals. And that last piece, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more in dialogue here, but the importance of everyone playing a role, of all of us engaging in this, the importance of leadership among faith groups, what the Pope has triggered here with the Catholic Church, what we're seeing from other leaders, and we're honored to have the just retired moderator of the United Church of Canada, Gary Patterson, here. There are lots of leaders in the faith community who are stepping up, and you all have incredible connections and the ability to mobilize and inspire many, many people, and that's going to be essential in these times ahead. I think it'll be key for governments, for spiritual and religious organizations, for business, for community. All of us as individuals, everything has to be in sync, and that partnership has to be strong. So from our perspective, I've asked Councillor Tim Stevenson to work on leading the efforts and bringing different faith groups together on these next steps, what we can do to take action together on our Green City plan, working with Deputy Mayor Andrea Reimer, who's been the architect of that plan. We want to integrate this work and make sure as community that we can be as successful as humanly possible. I have every confidence in that. Despite the gut-wrenching reality and the stories I heard in the Vatican, I did leave there with lots of hope and optimism. Somehow, the Holy Father certainly exuded that in his time with us, and I think we've all come away stronger and feeling energized to do this work for our future. So thank you for this opportunity. I'll look forward to a dialogue together.
I now see why my 19-year-old vegan daughter follows Mayor Robertson very closely. She has, at the very least, a philosophical and ecological crush. Potentially more. Our panel discussion. While people are returning to their seats, my 10-year-old son wanted me to share a scientific fact that involves an element of faith. And we'll see who the smartest scientists in the room are. Does anyone here know why it took until the 4th day for God to create the solar system? It takes time to plan it. He's 10. It's a tough crowd. So we've heard from our two keynote speakers. Thank you again, Archbishop Miller and Mayor Robertson. And now we'd like to welcome and introduce the rest of our panel. First, on my far left, is Reverend Hrant Tahanian. I knew I would start this right, and we're just getting started with the challenging words. Father Tahanian is the pastor of St. Gregory the Illuminator Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Church in Richmond. Born, raised, and educated in Montreal, he is a descendant of survivors of the Armenian Genocide. He studied at the Armenian Orthodox Seminary in Lebanon, the only such institution that survived the destruction of Western Armenia by relocating to Lebanon. There he finished his BA in Armenological and Theological Studies. After being ordained a priest, based on the 17 centuries old tradition of the Armenian Church, he served in the Catholicosate headquarters of the church as director of the Cilicia Museum in Lebanon. My apologies, Father, all around. In 2012, he was appointed pastor of St. Gregory Armenian Church, where he currently leads his parish, serving Greater Vancouver and BC. Father Hrant teaches and serves on the board of Taraz Armenian School, chairs the parish's refugee sponsorship program for refugees from war-torn Syria, and is currently working on an MA in theology at the Vancouver School of Theology. He has a passion for the outdoors, and I also recently learned he has an incredible Star Wars collection. Never judge a book by its cover. Star Wars Lego specifically. The mayor may have my daughter's heart, but my 10-year-old son will flock to Father's. And to Father's right is the Reverend Mary Fontaine. She is Cree from the Mistawasis First Nation in Saskatchewan, where she grew up learning the traditional values of her community. Mary is an ordained minister of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, an executive committee member of the World Communion of Reformed Churches, and chair of the Native Ministries Consortium at the Vancouver School of Theology. She is an Indigenous advisor for an advisory committee at the Canadian School of Peace of the Canadian Mennonite University. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Native Studies, a Master of Divinity, and is in the Master of Theology Indigenous Studies Center program at the Vancouver School of Theology. In 2004, she founded Hummingbird Ministries, a Presbyterian ministry of healing for the Aboriginal people of British Columbia's West Coast. The ministry's vision is holistic healing of Indigenous people and the healing of the relationship with the Church and Canadians. They promote a healthy Indigenous identity through cultural arts and the reclaiming of the gifts of Indigenous people, for example, as stewards of the earth. Also joining us in the center of the panel is Jay Ritchlin. Jay is the David Suzuki Foundation's Director General for Western Canada and Acting Director for its Science and Policy team. Jay leads the Western Canadian team in its efforts to achieve sustainable practices in the Western provinces. He has a biology degree from Kenyon College in the U.S. and over 15 years' experience working on solutions to environmental challenges. Before becoming director, Jay led the Foundation's aquaculture and offshore oil and gas campaigns and shared responsibilities on marine fisheries and sustainable seafood campaigns. Prior to that, Jay worked on pulp, paper, and toxic issues in Canada and the U.S. and spent 4 years working in commercial fisheries. He's also worked in the U.S. Congress on foreign policy and military issues and spent several years working with Greenpeace in the U.S. and Canada. And a good friend of mine, Andrew Weaver, some of you may know, who is the leader of the Provincial Green Party, when he saw the list of people joining on this panel, he applauded the organizing committee for bringing together such a diverse and qualified group of people to have this discussion. He also sends his greetings as one of Canada's top climate scientists, and something he said not many of you know, that he's also a lifelong Christian and a man of faith. So he's also applauding this dialogue along with many other scientists in the world, encouraging us to continue building on this papal document and on recent momentum. So we're now going to be taking some questions from the audience. If you'd like, please tweet your questions using the hashtag ClimateRCAV, which is here at the bottom of the screen. We do have some cell phone reception challenges in this room, so you're welcome to use our building Wi-Fi. If you look for networks, you'll see JP2 guest as the network, and the password is the same except all in lowercase, JP2 guest. So please feel free to send your questions, and we have a team collecting them, and we will bring them to the podium as we can. But we'd like to start with a question that emerged during the preparation for this event. And we're going to start with the three panelists who we have not heard from yet, starting with Reverend Fontaine, if we could. First question is, the climate belongs to all and is meant for all, yet a disproportionate amount of the Earth's resources are consumed by Canada, the United States, and other wealthy countries. How can we in Canada fulfill our obligations in justice to those who are poor in developing nations? So we will open it up.
Thank you. First of all, I'm honored to be asked to be here with all of you beautiful people, and especially that I'm Presbyterian amongst all the Catholics. So thank you for the Squamish and the Tsawwassen and the people on whose lands we are. I'm honored to be here. The question, I have to say that let's practice in Canada first with the poor people here. Let's make sure that the First Nations people have clean water. Let's make sure that we stop drilling, fracking, and doing all those terrible things on those lands where the people in southern Alberta are dying off like crazy from cancer because of the poison in their water. The companies will not clean up. They're doing the same thing everywhere. Up in northern Saskatchewan, just any number of places where they're not doing their job. They're not cleaning up, they're just leaving a mess. We gotta make those companies accountable for what they're doing. We gotta stop doing this. And like, I think it was Mayor Gregor Robertson that said, when we put our mind to it, we can do it. We can do it because it's important for our survival as human beings, but not only human beings, but all our relations. We are connected, and when someone hurts, we all hurt. It doesn't matter who we are, where we live. The circle comes back. We cannot escape it. And we said something about the climate getting warmer and warmer. And I'm often thinking the ancient wisdom of our Indigenous people. I wonder what they knew about the ground and the resources that are underneath there, why the Creator put them there. I am sure it has a purpose, why it was put there in the first place. Could it be a refrigeration system that we're getting rid of and the earth keeps getting hotter and hotter? There's things that got lost when we lost our languages. There's great wisdom in that. We know the gender of things, the life, the spirit of things. We do sweetgrass, we pray with sweetgrass. It has a spirit of kindness in it. Our people knew these things. And some of our knowledge is still there. It's important. And we can help you. We can help each other. It is time for the Indigenous voice to be heard because our people know things about the earth, about all our relations, that people have not heard of before. And now I'm hearing the great point. It is awesome. I know when I first heard him talk, I thought, wow, I like this Pope. Now my Catholic friend says, wow, you like the Pope? You're just an awesome guy. I'm really, really, really honored to be part of this. And I don't think it's any surprise, really. I think the Creator works in mysterious ways. And I'm just so honored to be part of this. And I'll leave these guys to answer. On their own.
Thank you, Reverend Fontaine. We're honored to have you here. Next, Jay Ritchlin, would you please also address this question?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. My thanks to Coast salespeople for having us on their unceded territory. It's an honor to be here. I've been sitting here thinking, gosh, it's getting harder and harder to be an environmentalist around here. The words and the sentiment and the understanding that we are all interconnected and interdependent is what we have based our work on for decades. And of course, the First Nations people in many parts of the world have based their understanding on for generations. So to see it being articulated so clearly and linked to this concept that it's about not just our right to things, but our responsibility for things. We have a campaign called The Right to a Healthy Environment at the David Suzuki Foundation. We're looking to see an amendment to Canada's Constitution that would guarantee the right to clean air, clean water, healthy food from clean soil. But I stop and I think sometimes about that is not just a right, but it's something that we have to earn through responsibility. And I think that responsibility goes to all of those parts of the ecosystem that we're connected to. That's our fellow people, the plants, the oceans, the air. We are a part of all of it. It is a part of us. In 1992, we helped draft with over a dozen coastal First Nations a Declaration of Interdependence. And the resonance between what the Pope's encyclical now is saying and what that document says is unbelievable to me. So as we think about being stewards of our relationship with the earth, I don't see very much problem about thinking in the same way that we're stewards of our relationship with our fellow human beings. If we have too much of the earth's resources, other people have too little. When I lie awake at night, it's thinking globally about the confluence of our climate crisis, our biodiversity crisis in our oceans and our lands, and the fact that while we have so much, so many people around the world don't even have enough, that the only equation that works without just tearing the guts out of the earth is that we have to give up a little of what we have. We have to get better at being efficient with it. We have to treat it with respect because that's showing respect to everybody around us. Now, there are a range of policies and practices and scientific facts that we could spend a lot of time going through tonight, and maybe at some point we'll have an opportunity to talk about what we need our leaders to do in Paris. But I think that fundamentally, at a very deep level, people with a deep sense of what it means to be an ecologist and a deep sense of what it means to be a spiritual person are finding that the overlap there has quite a bit of range, and that it's maybe that 80-20 rule, the small percentage of things that separate the way we see the world are nothing compared to the ways in which we share a common understanding and a common need. So I think in looking at how we solve this climate crisis, we do have to help those developing parts of the world achieve something resembling a morally defensible standard of living without going down the same rat hole that we've gone down in North America and Europe. Many of our material successes come from taking what was rightfully in those parts of the world, whether it was here in Canada, North America, or in Europe, Africa, South America. We have profited and benefited from overusing the planet, and we need to find a way around to, of course, protecting our families, the future of our own children, but that is equal to protecting the future of all the families around the planet and the core of what we all depend on, which is that ecosystem that provides us our clean air, our clean water, our food, and the place that we can be in community with each other.
Thank you very much, Jay. Father.
Your Eminence, Archbishop Miller, Mayor Gregor Robertson, honorable co-panelists, dear guests, and attendees. Allow me first to thank His Holiness Pope Francis for having initiated this symposium by means of the Laudato Si encyclical, as well as the conference in Rome attended by our honorable mayor. I would also like to thank the organizers at the Archdiocese for having put this symposium together and having invited me on the panel. I have to confess that I am truly humbled to sit amongst such distinguished guests and panelists. I feel humbled because although I have done some research and have had the opportunity to implement new forms of sustainability in our parish, I am not an expert in the field. But here lies, I am convinced, one of the key solutions. We as citizens of this blessed country do not have to be experts in order to make a difference. Moreover, expert or not, we have an obligation, as His Holiness points out in the encyclical, by saying, developed nations are morally obliged to assist developing nations in combating the climate change crisis. One might want to interject here and ask, on what grounds are we morally obliged? The question cannot be dismissed. After all, it is reported to be the first question directed to God by a human being. Am I my brother's keeper? Lest you start to worry, I will not try and analyze this moral and theological problem today, the short time we have. But quite frankly, finding an answer that satisfies everyone is not a prerequisite to actually helping our sisters and brothers. The good news is, and I am sure you will all agree, that the majority of human beings, Canadian or other, truly want to see every single one of their fellow global citizens enjoying the same blessings, joys, and rights that they do. As to the question how we in Canada can fulfill our obligations in justice to those who are poor, our governments have a great role to play undeniably, but I would like to focus our attention on the people, the true driving force. Our recently elected Prime Minister rightly noted that change was not brought by him, but by the people. Yes, our governments have the power to implement change more effectively through legislation, but they probably won't do anything if the general public is not concerned. As I said, when it comes to sustainability, equality, and citizenship, I believe that the majority of humanity's children are concerned. And the current generation specifically is very proactive through the tools of social media. But I would suggest we have to move from a proactivity that is couch and e-device centered to one that embraces the real changes concrete and banners have achieved in the past. Instead of signing hundreds of petitions, let's try something new. Let's put our money where our right click is. Let's take on the challenge to only sign petitions we will be willing to go the whole distance for by marching, demanding, and protesting when the cause calls us.
Thank you, Father. We're seeing a theme of a call to action, which is inspiring. Second question, and maybe we'll go from right to left on the panel for this one. Some brief answers on what Archbishop Miller has already touched on. Pope Francis encourages us to listen both to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. How is our concern for our fellow human beings connected to our concern for the environment? And what happens when we are attuned to only one or the other? Archbishop Miller.
He didn't give me this question beforehand either. The interconnectedness between the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. It seems to me that it would be possible to imagine a kind of ecological policy, which in fact was sound from an ecological point of view, but would not take into account the effects that it would have on the poor, who are, in a sense, often immediately concerned with the policy, because policy changes have to take into account, obviously, all of the people. That would be that interest. It's also possible, and I think this is probably more frequently the case, that we could be very aware and very attuned to the needs and the cry of the poor, and not see the interconnectedness with the structural reasons about their poverty, which are often, as we now know, kind of increasingly influenced by such things as climate change, lack of water, and so on, that we could redress or hear the cry and even attend to that cry by comfort, by providing things or goods or even services, without really seeing that their cry is provoked because there are serious ecological, well, I guess the word disasters behind them, that is at the cause of it. And I think one of the major points of the Pope is to see that the concern for ecology and the concern for justice are necessarily and not accidentally connected, that in fact to separate one from the other is to be unfaithful to to who we are, to the grammar of creation and the role of the human person within it.
Thank you. Mayor Robertson.
What happens when we're attuned to one or the other? I would say that the missing ingredient here between social justice and environmental justice is economic justice. And we talk about the triple bottom line and the three-legged stool, and what Pope Francis identified very clearly, and as the Archbishop mentioned, some bombs in there that go straight at the challenges and the problems that are created by an economy that's so reliant on fossil fuels and basically exploiting the resources that don't renew themselves. They're gone once they're gone. And in the process of exploiting those, we poison the earth. And so that's where these worlds meet. We have to radically transform our economy to be benign and to, in fact, be restorative to a planet that we've done so much damage to. But that has to happen at the same time that we deal with ending extreme poverty, and as the Pope has said, modern slavery, human trafficking. We have to raise the world's poor up through this transformation of the global economy. There's an opportunity to connect the dots and actually with transformation for it to lift people out of poverty, to address the social justice challenges we face, and to heal the planet. And to try and do any of those in isolation will be an overall failure. We simply can't do that. But I don't underestimate the challenge when we see the capitalist system, which the Pope makes quite severe commentary on. The capitalist system sees big dollars in the green economy now, in renewable energy. The amount of capital being invested in renewable energy for 3 years in a row now has exceeded the capital going into fossil fuels. It's the biggest business opportunity of our time. And perpetuating the current system that does keep the world's poor down while capitalizing on the opportunity with renewable energy or clean technology would be a great failing and will come back to bite us. So I think this is an important time, and the Pope has spoken to this and written this. We have to keep social justice front and center in this. The green jobs that we create have to be for people who need them the most, and make sure that we achieve all these goals in harmony.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson.
This is such a challenging question. As an environmental science-based charity, we are challenged to stick to our charitable status by being factual and science-based and looking at these kind of things. But you just can't at certain times escape the connection to impact on people in a way that maybe isn't scientifically provable. So this is something I wrestle with a lot in my work. But when I first started in environmental work, I was working on toxics issues, the issues of pollution in the environment. And in the United States in particular, you see this in Canada as well, all the garbage incinerators, all the toxic waste dumps are near communities of color, poor peoples. Cancer Alley in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Great Lakes have many sites like this, the Industrial East, all of these places. And it was one of the things that I was quite amazed by. Greenpeace USA in particular in the 80s had this connection between the poverty and the pollution being the same thing. And even at that time, Greenpeace International didn't quite get it. The European office said, well, why are you worried about this? Just stop the toxics. So I think that the obvious comparisons are there when we have a system that is designed to maximize one thing at the expense of all other things. People and creatures, ecosystems without power, suffer at the hands of that system. So I think that as we look at creating taxes that reduce carbon, we also need to look at transportation that moves people around efficiently and without great expense. As we look at lessening the way our cities create greenhouse gases, we need to also look at creating renovations and retrofits of social housing that is affordable and also carbon neutral and friendly to the environment. So where we are looking to change the way the fossil fuel industry is used to create electricity, we also need to look at helping those places without enough power to light themselves up at all, to create that power with alternative energies that don't further the greenhouse gas problems that we have. So if we tackle these problems, we tackle them together, I think we will find more enduring solutions, because environmental problems are really human problems caused by us and hopefully mitigated by us and with some help from nature along the way.
Thank you, Jay. Reverend Fontaine.
Thank you. I'm reminded of the scripture from Genesis 1:28, having dominion and subduing the earth. One of the feminist theologians, Rosemary Radford Ruther, said that she blamed the Christians for the attitude that seems to have overtaken the Western world, of how we think of the things that are not human as less than, or something that we have to control and subdue. And it's a very unfortunate thing. I don't know how to deal with that except to reconsider our faith, reconsider the teachings of Jesus, reconsider the teachings of the First Nations people, the way we regard the earth, and learn teachings of our people how our bear, we call him Brother Bear or Brother Eagle or Sister Moon, or these gender things too. Every one of these things has a gender. Fire is masculine, water is feminine, there's balance, there's all these things that matter, and there's wisdom in all these things. But I'm thinking of this attitude, and I think before we can go anywhere, before we can do anything to change what's going on, is we have to examine our hearts, examine our faith. In my denomination, justice seems to be put on the back burner, and my sister Jeanette fights really hard to make sure the church understands. And lots of people like her are putting the word out there, making people aware. And I'm so honored and so thankful that so many people have taken an interest in what's going on with the earth. It's encouraging and yet discouraging when we see things like people trying to build a pipeline under Burnaby Mountain. It's just the idea of trying to put that pipeline when you know the earth moves, know that mountain is going to move, those rocks don't stay still. And who's going to clean up the mess? And so when something hits us in the face like that, we know that we got to take a stand. We know that we have to do something. Because we live here. Burnaby Mountain may be far from Richmond, but it's not that far. It's not that far from even across Canada, in the water system, everywhere. The earth is connected and we are connected. We are all, if one is poor, we're all going to be poor. It's one thing affects another. Whether we're, and lately, do you see all the bears coming in? You see the animals coming into the cities. They're telling us something. They're telling us something. Pay attention. It means something. When I lived in northern Alberta, I went up with my friends to their trap line. And we were picking some tea, muscat tea, or peppermint tea. And there's these little puddles of water with birds floating up in a pool of oil. And it was, the people had, their area had been polluted by oil. They could no longer trap. And they were fighting that day to go to the ESO office to get $80 for the year for the income they had lost. So this stuff is not new. This has been going on for many, many years in Canada. And it's finally, finally gaining awareness. And like I said, I'm really, really glad that it is. And it is time. I think we do have time to reconcile with the earth. We can take those steps to make things better. If you think about the moose up in northern Quebec, it was affecting the women and their milk because they were eating the moose meat. And that's something that you don't hear on the news. You don't hear that stuff. About Uranium City, you don't hear this stuff in the news. So it's been a well-kept secret, but now it's out in the open. And for that I'm thankful. Thank you.
Thank you. Everything is interconnected. The affirmation of this fact, I think, is also important in finding a permanent solution. On one hand, if we do not love our brothers and sisters whom we see, how will we be able to care for the ozone layer, which we cannot see? And conversely, we won't be able to take care of our neighbors if we do not preserve the environment that's so crucial for their survival. Allow me to share two citations that will adequately portray these two extremes. So the first is from Dennis Edwards, a Catholic priest, from his book, Partaking of God, Trinity, Evolution, and Ecology. And he writes the following: "A great deal since the Reformation and the Enlightenment has focused on the relationship between God and the individual human being. social justice. What has been largely left out is the rest of the natural world. Meanwhile, the natural world has been treated ruthlessly as something for humans to exploit with little or no regard for consequences, as if it were simply an infinite resource for endless economic growth, unquote. And if we are to only focus on manipulating nature for our economic benefit and disregard the well-being of neighbors, we are not only not helping the poor, but becoming agents of poverty's spread, and not just in the third world, but in the future, in every single world in the future. And for this extreme, Pope Francis says the following: 20% of the world's population consumes resources at a rate that robs the poor nations and future generations of what they need to survive. What's ironic is that we, or our children, might be the generation that actually falls into that pit that we're digging. And to conclude, another quote from Norman Wurzbach, a US ecologist, from his book, Making Peace with the Land, that says, the abundant mirage substitutes fossil fuels and cheap labor for human intelligence and honest labor. Before the mirage vanishes and leaves us outside the door hungry and cold, we should change course. The cry of the poor has the same tonality as ours. We might have forgotten how ours sounds. The solutions we will support should enable the poor to forget their cries instead of us remembering ours, as well as dissipate the cry of nature, which might be in a frequency our ears cannot hear, but if they could, it would probably be deafening. And allow me to quote, in conclusion to this question, from the Apostle Paul, when he writes in Romans 8, we know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God.
Thank you, Father. Thank you all. So we have some questions from the audience. First one is, how can we encourage local industry to apply the UN definition of sustainable development? And there's several others that have come in along similar lines. What can we do to encourage local businesses to start to get on board or show more progress in these areas? Mayor, would you mind starting us?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind. First, we have launched here at the city a climate pledge for businesses, and this is a climate pledge that we've already had over 100 businesses commit to, and it's there's a couple layers to it. One is advocacy, calling on our Canadian government to make a bold commitment at the Paris Climate Summit. That's one option that businesses can weigh in for. Secondly is to support the City of Vancouver's goal to be 100% renewable and find ways of supporting that. And third is that they transform their own operations. They report on the climate pollution that they're responsible for, their greenhouse gas emissions. They focus on being more efficient, being more green in their business operations. So we've had great uptake, a lot of big companies, small companies, a wide array of different industries. Companies have committed to this climate pledge, and we're trying to get that out through the city, to all of the businesses. So we can go to Paris and say, well, here's what our business community is committing to. They're going to want to talk, and it's an important part of us coming as governments and making our commitments, calling on the business community to step up shoulder to shoulder with us is really important. I would say one other piece, obviously businesses can be more responsible. We all support businesses every day with our choices. Whatever we buy, as consumers, you can make choices what businesses you support. You can pay attention to to businesses that give 1% of their sales to the environment. There's a 1% campaign that's gone on historically. You can check out what businesses do, and a lot of businesses now have to be very upfront and transparent about this on their websites and their materials, because consumers are demanding to know. They want to support ethical businesses, whether that's environmentally responsible or committed to social justice and a living wage, something that we support as a city now. We want to be sure that as consumers, that companies are doing the right things, if we're going to support them with our hard-earned dollars. So I think that's a part that we can do in pushing the pace and ensuring businesses step up and do their part.
Thank you. Please, Jay. So I'll just, one thing, a price on carbon. BC's carbon tax is one of the most successful economic and climate change control policies in the country. We brought in the tax, we reduced fuel use, and our economy grew at the same time. We did not see a disaster, businesses did not collapse and go away. The tax is fair in the sense that it is applicable to everyone, and the only thing that it incentivizes is to reduce the amount of carbon that you put out, and your business does better when you do that. So we need our provincial government to get back in the lead on this. They've been resting on this policy since about 2009. The tax does not cover the process emissions of industries right now. They exempted LNG facilities that burn LNG to power their own processes from having to account for that carbon, which is a bizarre bit of double speak to me. And the price signal is not continuing to go up, so that it's frozen and no longer an increasing incentive. So when the Premier goes to Paris and wants to announce the bold new Climate 2.0 plan for British Columbia, it had best include a recommitment to an increasing price on carbon. Our neighbors in Alberta are reviewing their carbon price, and hopefully our new federal government will look for ways to encourage a marketplace in carbon in Canada, so that those provinces like Ontario and Quebec that have joined with California to start the carbon trading market in the Western Climate Initiative will have a bigger pool to work with and more success. And this is policy wonky, it's tax, no one really likes it, but it works. And it gets carbon reduced, and it allows that economy to adjust in ways that are sensible, plannable, and economists understand.
Thank you. By the way, I was taking a quick poll. 89.4% of you smiled when Jay mentioned the new federal government. Mayor Robertson.
You just did that in a non-partisan way.
To bring that full circle, so that the mayors who are across this region have called for the past 7 years since I've been a mayor, to actually to see an increase to the carbon tax, which was frozen some years ago, and then use the money that's raised by that carbon tax to fund transit, so that people who can't afford cars necessarily. We got a referendum on sales tax. And generally, if you ask people if you want to pay more tax, most people will say no. It's a fairly predictable response. In this case, we have a carbon tax, and if we increase it and invest that money into transit, then we burn less carbon into the atmosphere, and people have a convenient way to get around, particularly people who can't afford cars. So you address the challenges for people on lower incomes, you reduce the climate pollution, and you make sure that there's a loop here that focuses our tax dollars onto doing good things in the world. So that's a piece that we've been pushing for. We would love to see the BC government take leadership on this as a next step.
Father or Reverend Fontaine, any thoughts on what we as consumers or we as people can do?
I suppose it depends on what kind of a business it is. If it's an oil company, well, but ethical practices, I suppose, things that the things that we purchase are not abusing people in third world countries or things like that. I think So,
Thank you.
One thing that comes to mind that many of us are aware of is faith groups and NGOs having in different situations taken a stance on moving away from certain foreign products when the exporting country hasn't seemed to be on a negative path. Now, if we were able to get an archbishop, a Presbyterian, an Orthodox, an ecologist, an elected official, many other faith groups, there was a rabbi here, together, imagine what we could do if we were able to apply pressure together.
Thank you, Father. We're coming up on 8:30. Jay, I know you have a ferry to catch.
Yes, I am. Fortunately and unfortunately, I live on the Sunshine Coast. My wife is in Ontario looking after her parents, so my kids are home alone, and I'm going to have to, unfortunately, excuse myself.
Before Jay arrived, we were wondering how are we going to know the one from the Dave Suzuki Foundation. Great hair, backpack, hiking shoes on the back. Thank you, Jay. Did he say that was a good stereotype or no? Next question from the audience. What is the role of schools in addressing ecological change, and what types of curriculum programs will our governments, agencies, and faith communities support? Archbishop, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. The encyclical itself has a long section on the importance of education, of making people aware of the questions at hand before providing solutions. Of course, schools, and particularly schools through their curriculum, because that's where they sort of show what they do and they are, schools, universities, colleges. I think it's very important that we develop further, because there are certainly units already in place in which ecological questions and so on are given a certain importance. For the independent Catholic schools, it will be very important that we develop appropriate units that are written really specifically in light of the sort of the shift, the mindset that is contained in Laudato Si. We also are fortunate enough, the educational efforts, but also I think certainly from the faith communities, we have a terrific network of congregations and parishes where people very frequently gather into groups for discussions. There are already innumerable discussion helpers that are available for this encyclical and for other environmental issues, and I think that we would do well to encourage those particular groups within our congregational settings to pursue this. We're not going to, we need to know and to know more deeply rather than simply respond with sort of emotion to the real questions at hand. And that's done by taking the time, which is done, we're fortunate enough to have schools in which time can be set aside and should be set aside. And I see no reason why it wouldn't be.
Excellent. Thank you. Mayor Robertson.
Sure. It's absolutely essential that the education piece, and students of all ages, all of us have more to learn. So not being exclusive to the education system we have, but the importance of adult education, which has taken a beating here in the province. Not only trades related, but there are lots of people who are trying to get a high school education who didn't have that option when they were younger. So there are important political decisions that need to be made to ensure that education is funded appropriately, and we've seen a lot of impacts to our school system over the past decade or more. That said, we've had great leadership at the local level in our schools. The Vancouver School Board has done a great job of integrating sustainability and talking about the environment and taking action. We see gardens in a lot of the schools now. We had a number of years, the chair of the school board, Patty Backus, did a great job with her team on the school board of ensuring that sustainability was a big focus for our local schools. And so we've seen things like recycling driven by kids coming home and putting the heat on their parents to learn how to recycle. And I think we're going to see that same thing happen here with the bigger challenge of climate and making sure we're consuming less and we're dealing with our waste, reducing our waste. I think a lot of that leadership does come from our youth, and it's important to have it in our school system. And I know that exists locally, but the leadership for that is there. We have to be strong in calling for the BC government to fund education at all levels to make sure that the resources are there.
Thank you.
Just to get political again.
Reverend Fontaine.
I think we need to reassess our values, and even at the kindergarten level. Back home where I come from, I was asked to go and teach kids in the bush, and we had this circle. And I asked them how much they knew about what do you learn in school, about the economy, about saving the water, making sure it's clean, kept clean. And we were sitting by the lake, and kids all in a circle, and we were saying, well, what if the government came and said to our chief, we want to buy your water, and and we'll give you all these, lots of money, so you can, but we need your water. What would you do? Would you say yes or no? And they all said no together. And a little guy lifts his hand and said, how much? As humans, I think we're all susceptible to this. And I used to work for an oil company in Calgary, and I have friends who work for it, and I see these guys that become engineers. They study, they get, that's what they want to do. And for those people that are in that kind of industry, when it comes to how do I feed my family, it can be really hard. So I want to just recognize that as hard as we work, because our main industry is here, it's not oil and gas, but in some countries, in some areas of the country it is. And so it's going to be a lot harder in those environments to come to terms with how do I feed my kids. And in my own family, where we say, what do we do? How do you get out of this system and move into something else? So yeah, but it does start in school with the young ones, and the thing about money, we have to reassess our values about money. Do we say no to the companies that are coming to want to buy our water, or but then what do? If we don't have any money to get food. So it's always hard for poor people, but it's also hard for us who will become poor if we don't have a job. So I think it's a hard issue in some cases, and I think it's something that we all need to pray for and need to keep in, I don't know, we just really need to be able to understand each other. And as much as fierce as we may be, as passionate as we may be with this, yes, let's save the earth, there's also those situations where it does require compassion and understanding, and it will take time to move into that place for those people that have to suddenly, we don't want a whole bunch of people homeless. We've got enough homeless people, so we've got to just keep that in mind. Thank you.
That's a very good point. Father, and you're involved with this school.
Yes, so we have a Saturday school at our community center, and also a camp, a summer camp. The summer camp started 9 years ago when I wasn't yet here. It's mainly an Armenian dance camp, but we also teach them Armenian history, language, religion. And we've been trying to be as pro-ecology as possible. One of our volunteers actually is very active in that field, so we have no choice in reality. So every year we try to do something new. 3 years ago we made the campers build a community garden, and every year now they grow fruits and vegetables, and then we started the carpooling program. So we have about 60 campers and 20 volunteers, roughly 50 cars, and our community is not located in Richmond. They're all over Greater Vancouver, so our carbon footprint would be pretty large in order to succeed in the camp. So we decided to reduce the number of vehicles, and we've been able to do that from 50 to 20. And it requires sacrifice. So for example, I live close to the church, but most of our parishioners, not most, but about half are around Burnaby and Coquitlam. So if I were to drive every morning there and then come back, and then drop the kids and then come back to my place, that would defeat the purpose. So I actually moved to Burnaby in a parishioner's house for those 3 weeks and stay there. Obviously it's a sacrifice, but you get used to it, and it actually becomes enjoyable, right? You live with your community even closer than you would on a Sunday. And then the third thing we did this year was banning water bottles, the non-reusable type. Last year we had compostable cups, but then even though they're compostable, again, you're wasting a lot of energy because the kids use it once and they don't know which one is theirs and they throw it away. Whereas if they had their own bottle, obviously they use it. And it wasn't easy at the beginning. The first day out of the 60 kids, I think 15 did not have their bottle. But we did not give them cups. We said use your hands to drink water. And the next day everyone had their water. So it's fairly simple. And why did I bring this up? Maybe we can implement this in our school system here. Some might be opposed to it, but as Mayor was saying, we're trying to make Vancouver the greenest city, and this might be one of the ways to do it.
Thank you, Bob. We did that at our school. Every prayer we could end with water. And as Mayor Robertson mentioned, I wanted to ask, how many of you have children and grandchildren who teach you about these issues, or that are very aware of them? So many of us. I was touring my family in this new building, and my wife said, it's beautiful, and my kids loved it, and my 10-year-old said, is it LEED certified? And I said, try getting a permit from the city of Vancouver. This is before I liked the mayor. So very good answers. We are getting down to it for time, so we have time for one more question. There are so many. I want to ask a special favor of the city of Vancouver. Many of the questions we cannot get to tonight are directed to you and your staff. Could we pass those along and then ask for answers back in writing? And then we can share those by email as well. We appreciate that. I know I just put you on the spot, so we owe you a handful of water. Let's go. Our last question. There are so many. Thank you for all the questions. Here's a good one. Can you please speak about the positive, responsible uses of wealth and how those of us in urban centers can use our resources to improve life for all? Mayor, can we start with you? I heard a wise councilman say, give to the church. Is that I was going to say, give to the city.
Well, there's a great movement around simplicity and scaling back what we need to live with. So I think, notwithstanding the promotion of extreme wealth and consumption, which we see on television and movies, it's so prolific to see. And that has been the driving force in our culture for a long time now. There's certainly a rebound from that. A lot of people choosing to live with less and simplify their lives. It seems like a lot of this wisdom comes later in life, and people do scale back and live more simply. That would obviously be something that frees up resources to share make sure that people who don't have enough get more and are able to do better. So we've talked about the kind of at the grand scale, national governments contributing from developed countries to developing countries, and that transfer of wealth that I think is essential to preventing our planet from being in even more dire situation. So by the same token, there are so many great community organizations, faith organizations that do incredible community work and support people who need that support the most. There are lots of great charities and lots of great work done, and that's just the most obvious. Philanthropy is so important. We've had a pattern now for many, many years in government, of less government, of the social safety net wearing thin. And we've seen a change in government federally this week that hopefully shifts us back onto restoring a lot of the social safety net that Canada has been famous for around the world, that we deal with homelessness as a country. As part of paying our taxes, we make sure that people who need the support can get it. So philanthropy has emerged, particularly in the United States, as an alternate to government, making sure that that social safety net exists and that environmental responsibility is part of how we live. Philanthropy can't solve it. It's something we can do as individuals, but I think that the combination of do what you can with your resources, give generously, and live more simply, combined with making sure that we hold our governments accountable for looking after our society. That's why we have governments, and there's been this big shift away from that, saying that governments shouldn't be responsible, and we cut them back to the bone so that our schools are underfunded and people are living in poverty and homeless because the programs aren't supported. I think there's a part of sharing the wealth is making sure that our governments do a responsible job of that they have the resources, taxes are fair, but there's a redistribution of wealth to make sure those who need it get the support they need. So I think that it's a combination of individual and as a society, and that's what we use government for, and that's a role that we should be taking more seriously.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson. Archbishop Miller.
Sure. The question of wealth, the responsible use of wealth, the good wealth, seems to me it raises one of the most fundamental questions that we face, and the question of truth. What do we really believe? Where do we put our real values? And it doesn't take long look at a budget, whether it be a personal budget, a family budget, an institutional budget, to know what one's real priorities are, not just the voiced priorities. And I think an individual, but also probably in some way an institution, has to ask the question, if they're going to be responsible, where does my wealth come from? Why do I have it? I mean, how did that wealth come to be? How do I invest it or use it? And ultimately, what is the reason for my wealth? Why? This is a question that, of course, only a few people in the world have to deal with. Most people are dealing with not with wealth, but they're dealing with lack thereof. How do I, get the next meal and clothes and shoes on the feet? To me, you just have to look at how a person lives, and I think, as the mayor mentioned, simplicity of life is necessary. But can you be really simple in a 12,000 square foot home? I mean, there's all kinds of contradictions that honesty pushes us to ask about there has to be a ruthless kind of sense about this. There's too much, I believe, now I'm preaching. There's too much hiding from the real truth about this. And of course, wealth, I think, I believe this, is given for a purpose, and the purpose is not self-aggrandizement or luxury, but it's to be put at the service of the community or of others, both personally and institutionally. And this can only happen if there is a sense of poverty of spirit. that we understand where wealth comes from and ultimately what it's for, what Catholic social teaching calls the universal distribution of goods. It has to begin with an inner attitude. Otherwise, it's throwing from one's surplus, which people take and are grateful for. That's not, to me, responsible use of wealth. That's something very different. That's not being a good steward or a wise steward. So there's a lot. The Holy Father speaks a lot about money. He spoke like Jesus. He spoke about it again this week in his morning homilies. And it's not a secondary question in resolving any major social question, because the fair production of wealth, the use of wealth, and the sharing of wealth are absolutely fundamental to who we are as individuals and what it means to constitute a civil society. I'm sorry for the preaching.
I saw an online article this week that suggested the two most talked about people on the planet are, you want to guess one of them we've been talking about? Pope. Second? Donald Trump. This week that was reported. I thought, what an amazing example of why we're here and what we're talking about. So, I'm happy with what side I'm on. Reverend Fontaine, any additional thoughts on this question?
I can't relate to having wealth. But yeah, I definitely believe that sharing, again, it can be another preacher, but from another. Listening to the needs, what the needs are out there. Putting money where it's most needed. Helping people to empower people. Putting funds into programs that empower the homeless, the mentally ill, people who need to be raised up. I think, and again, I go back to the values of sharing, how in traditional indigenous times in this country, we relied on each other to share. It was just part of life. So I think if we could go back to those kinds of values, and I always say that there's an indigenousness in all of us, that we all come from some indigenous place, that we know when we're not doing something right, and we know when the Spirit is calling us to change direction. And I think the Spirit is calling us big time right now to change the direction that we're going as human beings. So I think, I don't know if that'll reach Donald Trump, but we can hope and pray.
Father.
No additional comments unless we won't have the opportunity for closing remarks.
Why don't we give you a minute, please?
All right. So we often hear our leaders talk about the greatness of our country. The affirmation is not erroneous, but some necessary light has to be shed on it in order to avoid drifting into harmful perceptions of exceptionalism. Most of the greatness in our country is not the doing of our current generation and current leaders. It is the result of the hard work, sacrifice, and especially the dedication to human rights of the previous generations that built this country. We can rightfully rejoice and enjoy the blessings they have left in their legacy, but we cannot claim to have participated in the revolutions and social reforms brought forth by human rights champions. We can, on the other hand, follow in their example, i.e., not be content, even if we have succeeded in our personal lives and careers. I think this is the greatest deficiency and lie we have fallen into. If every successful Canadian attempted to be a revolutionary, albeit a minor one, the Canadian arm would not only reach space, it would also empower the children of every nation, and in turn, astronauts would become a realistic career option for all. We also should never forget to be continually self-critical. Our country might be great, but it is not perfect. Far from it. How can we attempt to help other countries, and subsequently the citizens native to those countries, if we haven't yet taken care of the natives in our own? This topic is close to my heart because I myself, as was stated, am a descendant of genocide survivors who fortunately escaped the death marches but lost everything they had toiled for on their ancestral lands of at least 4 millennia when the Ottoman Empire organized and perpetrated the first genocide of the 20th century. By recognizing and correcting our mistakes in the past, we will be renewed and strengthened by the combined will of our citizens and all citizens in the world. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, writes the following in his book on Heaven and Earth, co-written with his friend Rabbi Skorka. We receive creation as a gift. At the same time, God gives us a task. But there is a moment in which man goes too far in this task. He becomes overly zealous with his work. He forgets about the gift, thinks that everything is the fruit of his labor, and that there is no gift. Let's redirect the zeal towards the gift and the giver. Let us praise him, Laudato Si, and then rest assured, we, the recipients of the gift, will truly rejoice in its blessings. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. So, as for the rest of the evening, as we mentioned earlier, we do not want this to be a one-off event. So we thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to similar events on this and other topics as well. And as far as what we can do tonight, very briefly, City of Vancouver has a climate pledge program in which businesses commit to supporting strong action on climate. So we welcome you to check out the pledge at climatepledgeyvr.com, and you're encouraged to sign and spread the word on this climate pledge within your circles and on through social media. We've also gathered with us some diverse and very interesting organizations that are exhibiting in our crush space out in our lobby here. So I'd like to just briefly describe them. We have Metro Vancouver Alliance, which I think the mayor referenced earlier. It's a broad-based alliance of 53 community groups, labor, faith, and educational institutions working together for the common good. Much more that you can learn about them and their great work in the foyer. The second group is the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace, which is the official international development organization of the Catholic Church in Canada and the Canadian member of Caritas Internationalis. So they are also exhibiting in the lobby and have a lot of great work to share. The third one is Instruments Beyond Borders. And they are a nonprofit society that deliver musical instruments to youth orchestras in disadvantaged communities at home and abroad. So in 1 year, they delivered approximately $40,000 worth of donated instruments and supported the St. James Music Academy on the downtown east side, where up to 200 children receive free after-school music lessons from professional teachers. Again, the connection between ecology, science, the arts, dealing with the entire human person. And last but certainly not least, we have Arosha, an international Christian organization with projects in 19 countries. Arosha inspires environmental change from a place of hope and is transforming people and places by showing God's love for all creation. If you've never been to their South Langley or South Surrey event, I've taken my kids there. It is a glimpse at the simplicity of the early 1900s, combined with the knowledge from the last 50 years of advanced research. So I think my wife said it's like Anne of Green Gables goes to MIT. Beautiful place to take your families and to learn more about these issues. So in closing, each of these organizations is doing great work. Please check them out before you leave. And we know there's a group that will appeal to every one of you. So that brings us to the end of the night. The next steps are in your hands. So let's get involved. We will stay in touch and we'll keep you updated. So we want to take this time also to thank Mayor Robertson and everyone from the City of Vancouver. Thank you so much for making this possible. Not to put pressure on you, but in this analogy, you're Einstein. You're Einstein and your father Lemaitre. I want to thank Archbishop Miller and the team from the Archdiocese of Vancouver for everything they have done. Reverend Fontaine and all of our First Nations representatives, thank you so much. Father Tahanian and Jay Ritchlin, who has left, for their participation. We also want to thank Councillor Stevenson, Emily from the Mayor's Office, the organizing committee, all the volunteers, and especially all of you for taking the time to join us tonight. So thank you very much. Have a good night, a safe trip home, and God bless.